Alright guys, Abel here, back with another video, and in today's episode we unfortunately arrived to the final installment of me discussing my recent shredding diet. In the past couple of videos, that's all we talked about, how I dieted and why I dieted exactly down to about 7% body fat. And I know that it was super exciting. I know that the entire world has stopped functioning as it did before. People quit their jobs and the planet have stopped spinning around because Abel got shredded. But it's time to move on to different things and discuss other topics as well. But there is one final thing that I want to discuss in today's video, and that is what I did after the diet, what was my exit strategy, how much I rebounded in body weight and body fat. And I also want to talk about what I would recommend to you as far as what you should be doing when you finish a cut and you got down to the leanest condition that you have gotten down to up until that point, or maybe you just finish a regular cut and you want to have a sound exit strategy without rebounding in body fat yourself. So I will be linking all the videos that I did up until now about my shredding diet. I discussed the biggest lessons that I've learned. I discussed the biggest challenges that I faced, and I also did a very long podcast episode on this topic. So I will be linking all of those down in the show notes. But a very short recap. I dieted for about 12 weeks. I started at around maybe 13% body fat and at 84 kilos or so. The diet lasted for 12 weeks and I got down to maybe 7% body fat and I lost about 8 or 9 kilograms. I ended up at 76 kilos or so. And yeah, I will put up some pictures here as well. And long story short, I did this cut because I wanted to have a photo shoot and wanted to have some decent pictures that I can use in YouTube thumbnails and for my website and things like that. Now, to get very specific right away, I ended my diet roughly 6 or 7 weeks ago. I did a 2 weeks maintenance phase right after the diet until I was waiting for my photo shoot to roll around. And if I'm looking at this 6 or 7 week time span, let's call it 7 weeks, I gained about 3 or 4 kilograms, so 7 or 8 pounds in this time frame. So if you do the math, that is about 1 pound per week on average. Now, if you get down to the body fat percentage that I've gotten down to, so 7%, let's say, that is not a sustainable body fat percentage for most people. So if you just want to feel good, have good workouts, look good while also having your well-being at a high level, be productive in life, have good sex drive, libido, good hunger and appetite management, then there is no reason to stay at that level of body fat, and probably you're better off gaining body weight and body fat initially at a much more rapid pace compared to how you would do so if you were to get down to, say, 12% body fat. So from that standpoint, if you look at the fact that in 6 or 7 weeks, I went up by about 7 pounds, that is pretty much a perfect game plan. That is maybe a more conservative recovery diet where you're intentionally putting on body weight and body mass at a fairly assertive rate. Now, I want to be completely honest with you, as I'm always trying to be, and I will tell you that as the end of my diet was approaching and as I was going through that 2 weeks of maintenance before my photo shoot, I got more and more tempted to try to hold on to this shredded level of body fat and conditioning for as long as possible. And the longer I was in this shredded condition, the more and more I was getting into these grandiose plans of how I'm only going to put on like 1 pound per month, and I'm only gonna go up in body fat by maybe 1% body fat increase per month, or maybe even slower. And even after 6 months, I will still be only up to maybe at 12% body fat. Even though I knew objectively that this level of shreddedness is just not maintainable in the long term, even though I was always preaching sustainability and not just looking at the end outcome and what body fat percentages look good on photos, but also look at what is conducive to well-being, productivity in life, and just overall having a high quality, good life that you can live and enjoy, I got tempted by the level of conditioning that I achieved. And I think that anybody who is getting down to the leanest level of body fat that they've ever gotten to will tell you that these temptations will come at some point. Maybe for fitness models and bodybuilders who have gotten down to this level of conditioning multiple times and have experienced the periods after these diets, will have a more objective outlook all throughout the process. But I think if this is your first time getting down to deep into the single digit levels of body fat, then your level of rationality and objectivity will get compromised and you will get tempted by these thoughts at some point. So as my photo shoot approached, and even right after my photo shoot, I was making these grandiose plans, and I even consulted with some people that I highly respected and asked them if they thought it was viable to go up very, very slowly in body fat and take advantage of each step of the journey as I'm gaining body weight and body fat, and not go up to a higher body fat percentage right away. And they pretty much gave me a thumbs up and told me that yes, in theory, it is possible. And I was excited to do that. But as Mike Tyson said it, I believe at one point, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that is pretty much what happened in my case as well. I had all these plans and they sounded great in theory, but you just cannot know how it will pan out in practice. And what I had to find out is that even though I loved the way I looked, it just felt like absolute crap. And at some point I had to settle for the idea that I will just have to gain body fat and body weight a little bit more quickly than how I planned at the end of my diet. So what I did right after my diet was still tracking my macros, because I was just so used to doing it for 12 weeks, or at least the last couple of weeks. And I also kept my entire diet structure the exact same. So I was eating the same number of meals at the same time, and I also kept my food choices the exact same. So at the end of my diet, my food selection was consisting of lean protein sources, non-starchy vegetables, low-calorie fruits, more specifically berries, more specifically strawberries, 1 or 2 servings of fatty fish, and a couple of eggs a day. And that is pretty much it. And some condiments on top of it, like cocoa powder and low-calorie sweeteners and things like that. So I simply kept consuming the same exact things. I just increased my portion sizes and the amounts that I was eating from these foods. So instead of, say, 3 bags of strawberries a day, I started eating 6 or 7. Or instead of 1 serving of fatty fish a day, I started eating 2. Or instead of 2 eggs for breakfast, I started eating 3 or 4. I made simple modifications like that, and I increased my calorie intake from about 2,200 near the end of my diet to about 2,800. And that's what I did during my maintenance phase. And when my photo shoot was over, then I added maybe 100 or 200 extra calories to put myself into a small surplus. That was working out well for a while, but then I found that the quantification and the constant counting and always having that numerical cap at the end of my meals and knowing that, okay, I have this many bites until the end of this meal and then I'm out of my numbers and then I have to wait for my next meal so that I can eat again. That was just really getting to me. So what I did at this point is that I removed tracking altogether from my non-starchy vegetables only. So I was still tracking my protein and fat intake. I still had a cap on the amount of fruits that I was eating per day, but the cucumbers, mushrooms, zucchini, tomatoes, these kinds of foods, I was eating ad libitum, and I allowed myself to eat as much of those as I want. And I said that, you know what? If I'm going to be gaining some extra body fat and I'm going to be going up in body weight a bit more quickly from eating mushrooms and zucchini, then probably that is what's meant to happen. So that was working out for a while. And a funny thing and an interesting thing to note here is that the amount of non-starchy veggies that I started eating this way was kind of scary at times. I honestly kind of frightened myself with the amount of non-starchy veggies that I could put down over the course of a single meal. And at times, I was honestly scared that I'm gonna eat myself into obesity if I keep eating these veggies at this rate. And this is one thing that probably I should note when you get down to a very low level of body fat is that, you know, everybody talks about the rebound after the diet and how you have these crazy urges to binge. And part of that is, of course, your body just wants to replenish fat stores. Your body just wants you to become a little bit fatter. And the sheer calorie intake and the desire to eat a higher number of calories every day is a big part of that. But another part of that is simply the desire to simply eat in an unrestricted manner. A part of you actually wants to feel uncomfortable at the end of meals. When you feel like, okay, I'm full, I'm comfortable already, but I'm still gonna eat more and more and more, and I'm just gonna stuff myself to an unreasonable extent. That is part of the compulsive desires that you have at the end of a very tough diet. And that is exactly what I feel like I needed to give myself after being dieted down to this very low level of body fat. And I decided that if there is one smart way to give myself this experience without overshooting my body fat levels to a crazy extent, that is to allow myself to eat as much as I want from the lowest calorie foods possible. And that was a very smart idea, I think, because yes, I did overeat, but the foods that I was overeating on were so low calorie that the amount of damage that I could do was very, very low. So that worked out well for a while, and my rate of weight increase went up by a little bit, but it was really, really minor. I mean, how much damage can you really do by overeating on foods like zucchini and mushrooms? But what I found over time is that while certain aspects of my well-being increased right away, such as my hunger and satiety responses, some aspects were still lagging behind a lot, such as my sleep quality, my energy levels, just my mood was chronically suppressed. I was super, super irritable. And even though I made it a big priority for myself that I'm going to reinvigorate my relationships and I'm going to try to become a less isolated, more sociable, more kind, just cooler person to be around all in all, and be nicer to my girlfriend, for example, I just found that I was so irritable, so moody all the time, that I just determined for myself that I just needed to gain weight a little bit faster. So what I did at this point is that not only did I remove tracking altogether from my vegetable intake, but I also removed it from my fruit intake. And I decided that this is a smart idea as well, because the fruits that I was eating were also fairly low calorie. So I was mainly eating berries such as strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, things like that. And I started eating those ad libitum as well. And once again, the amount of berries that I could put down per day was kind of scary. And I was eating to the point where, again, I was scared that I'm going to eat myself to obesity from blueberries and strawberries and raspberries. And once again, my rate of weight gain started to go up once again. And that is pretty much the story of how I gained 7 or 8 pounds over 7 weeks or so. Pretty much all that 7 pounds came from overeating on non-starchy veggies and berries. And that is pretty crazy to say, but that just goes to show the physiological state that you put yourself in when you deplete your body to such an extent over the course of a tough diet like what I've gone through to do this photo shoot. I should also note, in case you're wondering, that I did eat out a couple of times over these 7 weeks or so, but I was also very conservative every time that I did that. I knew that at the end of this diet, I would be super susceptible to food cues and food reward. And if I threw a whole bunch of super palatable, super calorie dense stuff on myself, then it would just lead to crazy overeating very, very fast. So I was very conservative with that. And I can say pretty confidently that the vast majority of the weight gain that I experienced all came from overeating on these very low calorie foods. So I did not change my food selection at all for basically at least 6 out of these past 7 weeks. And that was enough to gain back a fair amount of weight already. So that just goes to show that if I committed to my past mistakes and I started adding in a whole bunch of starches and nut butters and nuts and dark chocolate and a whole bunch of things that I did not eat for 12 weeks, I probably would have just ended up binging and gaining 15 pounds or 20 pounds instead of 7 or 8 pounds. And that is pretty crazy to say, but that is just the reality of really challenging your body and pushing yourself to a leanness that you haven't been at before. And so that was my past 7 weeks, and only now, only after overfeeding strategically and aggressively for a couple of weeks, only now am I at a place where my hunger and satiety responses have normalized, my energy levels are pretty much back to where they were before, my mood is infinitely better, my sleep quality is better. My girlfriend even commented that finally she's getting back the boyfriend that she had before I went on this crazy diet. And life is just getting back to normal. And my mindset during my meals have shifted slowly from how much can I eat in this meal to how much do I need to eat in this meal to actually feel good and satisfied. It took a while, but finally we got there. And all in all, I'm very satisfied with how it went. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, it wasn't always easy psychologically, and there were times when I was looking at my rate of weight gain with a little bit of resentment, and I also experienced some stress from all of this, but finally now my mindset is at a much better place, and more importantly, my physiology and overall health, I feel, is at a much, much better place. Now, one comment that I would want to make here, in case you ever attempted to get down to, say, 7% body fat, is at the end of it, whatever you decide to do, whether you decide to try to maintain that low level of body fat for a while, or maybe you do want to go back to a higher body fat percentage right away to just feel better once your photo shoot or whatever you dieted down for is over, is try to do it slowly enough so that you're not stressing yourself out like crazy. Because the thing is, no matter what other people are saying, no matter how other people might be telling you that you look too small, you look too scrawny, if you get that shredded, you will probably love the way you look and you will think that this is the best you ever looked. That's what I was thinking. Even though I was feeling like absolute crap for the most part, when I took off my shirt in front of a mirror, I was like, man, this looks awesome. This is the best I've ever looked. I love the fact that I can be bloated and watery and depleted. Whatever my acute condition is, I see abs and veins and striations everywhere. I loved looking the way I did there. And if I significantly overate right away and I just binged myself up to say 12% body fat in 2 weeks, that would have involved a huge amount of stress. So if you can, try to avoid that at least. And you have to gain body fat probably if you want to regain your well-being, and I fully support you doing that. But for your own sake and for your own sanity, try to slow it down at least to a point where you're not stressing the hell out of yourself. Now, the other thing that I want to address is what should you do in general when you finish a cutting phase? Because probably a lot of you guys are right now going through something like this. Maybe you just finished a diet now, or you're about to finish a diet, and probably you didn't get down to 7% body fat. Maybe you only got down to 12% body fat, which is a very good level of body fat to get to. Now you want to transition into a maintenance phase or a lean bulking phase, starting to focus on putting on muscle. What should your exit strategy be? And oddly enough, my recommendation would actually be to do exactly what I just did. And that might sound weird because I ended up gaining like a pound a week and I ended up gaining back a fair amount of body weight and body fat. And that's probably not what you want to do if you've gotten down to your desired level of leanness. But what you have to understand is that if you employ the same strategy that I did at 7% body fat, at 12% body fat in your case, you're not going to get the same results as what I've gotten. Basically, an analogy that we could use is at the end of a diet, imagine yourself like a wild animal that you're trying to hold on a leash. And I apologize if this analogy is a bit offensive, but basically, what does a wild animal want to do if you're holding it on a leash? It wants to go wild, run around and break things, live out all its impulses. Now, what do you want to do at the end of a diet? Go crazy, binge, overeat, and regain some weight right away. That is what your body wants you to do, and that is what your psyche wants you to do, because you're hungrier, your satiety responses are a bit messed up, you're dealing with all these cravings, and you just have impulses which you have to keep in check. And in this analogy, what is the leash? Well, in the case of the animal, that's what you're trying to hold it back with. And in the case of you and your diet, the leash is the structure and the rules that you have in place for yourself. So if you remove the leash from the animal, it's going to run around and break everything in sight. If you don't have rules and structure for yourself at the end of your diet, you might be at the risk of overeating and blowing a lot of your hard-earned progress during your diet. Now, once again, if you employ the same strategy that I did at the end of my diet when I gotten down to a very, very low level of body fat, in the case of getting down to say 12% body fat at the end of your diet, you're going to get a different result. What resulted in my case at gaining 1 pound a week, in your case is probably going to result in actually maintaining your body fat percentage or just putting yourself into a tiny, tiny surplus, which is going to be perfect for putting on muscle. Basically, in the case of the animal and the leash analogy, if you put a wild pit bull on the same leash as you did do a chihuahua, the pit bull is actually going to drag you forward. You're not going to be able to hold it in place completely. If you hold a chihuahua on the same leash, it's still going to try to run forward, but you're going to be able to hold it in place. So what I did is I kept my food choices the same. I kept my diet structure the same. I basically did not change anything. I just allowed myself to eat more of the same low-calorie, moderate palatability foods, and that just because of the realities of getting down to 7% body fat, in my case, resulted in gaining weight at a pretty hefty rate. In your case, it's probably going to mean just putting yourself at maintenance or maybe in a very slight surplus. I mean, unless your body is super, super depleted, how much damage are you really going to do if you overeat on mushrooms and zucchini and cucumbers and things like that? I mean, if you just say to a random person on the street, hey, this is your food selection, eat these low-calorie, moderate palatability foods, and eat as much of the green veggies as you want, most people are probably going to put themselves into a deficit. Now, if you finish the diet, and let's say you went from 20% body fat to 12% body fat, you might be eating a little bit more, but there is only so much desire that these foods can provoke out of you unless you depleted yourself to a crazy extent like I did. And the thing is, eating the same low-calorie foods at the end of a diet may sound a bit disheartening. It's like, man, finally my diet is over. I want to enjoy all these super tasty foods, and now you're telling me that I should be eating the same things. But the thing is, at the end of your diet, you will be glad that you can simply eat more of the same things. Even if you had a pretty tough diet, probably you had at least one or two favorite meals or favorite foods that you could eat during your day. Maybe in the morning you had a bowl of porridge and some fruit or something like that, which you really liked. Now, at the end of your diet, maybe eat two of those things during the day. Or maybe you had some fatty protein source that you really enjoyed, and during the diet you wished that you could be eating 2 portions of those instead of just 1. Now, at the end of your diet, allow yourself to eat those 2 portions that you wished for during your diet. That is kind of the bad news and good news of a tough diet. The bad news is that it will be somewhat restrictive near the end. The good news, though, is that your reference point for what constitutes tasty foods have changed, and now you will be much more appreciative of lower palatability and lower energy density foods. When you're in your normal state, maybe you're in a calorie surplus, or maybe you've been overeating for a while, then you really don't have much of an appreciation for lower energy density and lower palatability foods. And the only things that you can appreciate are super yummy, super calorie dense stuff, such as starches and maybe some of the junk foods that you normally would eat. But now, when you finish the diet, now you can actually appreciate things like non-starchy veggies and fruits and lean protein sources. So actually take advantage of this newfound appreciation for these foods and enjoy the fact that you can actually derive a fair amount of enjoyment from eating these foods in a much more unrestricted manner compared to what you were doing during your diet. So don't get overzealous with the inclusion of all kinds of super calorie dense, super tasty foods. Leave that for the time when your hunger and satiety response is completely normalized and you're already eating an amount of these low-calorie, moderate palatability foods that they are kind of making you uncomfortable, and you actually need to include some higher palatability, more calorie-dense stuff to actually be able to get in your calories without overstuffing yourself uncomfortably over the course of each meal. So make use of these strategies. Don't get too crazy at the end of a diet. Be strategic and take it in a stepwise fashion. And in that case, a happy world is actually waiting for you with your newly gotten leanness. But get too overzealous and too assertive with the reintroduction of all these super yummy foods, and you might be at the risk of binging and falling off the wagon and blowing a whole bunch of the progress that you made over the course of several weeks or even months of getting down to your desired leanness. So take this advice to heart. Trust me on this. I've learned these lessons in the hard way, and finally I've learned from it now, and I'm glad that I can actually share this with you. So hopefully you won't have to commit to the same mistakes that I've suffered from for years on end actually. So guys, that is pretty much all I wanted to say in today's video. That is the story of my rebound at the end of my diet. It's not too bad, as you could hear, but as I explained, at certain times it came with some stress that I had to deal with. But now I'm at a happy place finally with my body and with my mind, and I'm glad that I can actually say that honestly. And hopefully the advice that I gave you on how you should be ending your diet and what your exit strategy should be was also helpful. So with this, we arrive to the final episode where we talk about my shredding diet, and I have a whole bunch of other cool topics that I want to share with you in the upcoming videos. In the next one, if things are going according to plan, we will be talking about my new kind of updated thoughts on lean bulking and what I'm advising to people for whom the biggest challenge during the lean bulking phase is not getting in enough calories and not staying too skinny, but their biggest challenge is actually not getting too fat when they are bulking. So if that is you, then the next video should be very helpful, because that's what I'm going to be talking about, because I do have some new updated thoughts on that, which I think are going to be very helpful for you. So hopefully you're excited for that. If you are, then comment with a yes, and then I can be even more excited to make that video. With that, Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, and if you're new here, subscribe. More cool stuff are yet to come on this channel. And like the video, let me know what you thought. If you want to be working together with me on your fat loss or muscle building related goals, then check the link in the description below and we can hop on a call, discuss how things would work out. And other than that, like the video, comment, let me know what you thought. And with that, see you in the next video.